Hi everyone, welcome back to our Histo-PH family, where forgotten Filipino history finally comes alive. Today we're diving deep into why Filipino DNA is different from other Asians, a story that rewrites everything we thought we knew about our beginnings. When Filipinos take DNA tests, something remarkable appears in their results that sets them apart from virtually every other population in Asia. It's not just about percentages or ethnic breakdowns, it's about carrying the genetic signature of humanity's most ancient journey, a story written in chromosomes that spans over 50,000 years. This isn't marketing hype or national pride talking. This is hard science, backed by decades of genetic research, archaeological discoveries, and DNA analysis that has fundamentally changed how scientists understand human migration and evolution in Southeast Asia. Let's start with what makes Filipino DNA genuinely unique on a molecular level. When geneticists analyze DNA samples from different Asian populations, they're looking at specific genetic markers called haplogroups, single nucleotide polymorphisms, and admixture percentages. In most East Asian populations like Chinese, Japanese, or Koreans, you see a relatively homogeneous genetic profile dominated by markers that trace back to a major population expansion that occurred around 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. These populations share similar Y chromosome haplogroups like O1A, O1B, and O2, and mitochondrial DNA haplogroups like A, B, F, and M7. Filipino DNA tells a radically different story. Instead of showing genetic homogeneity, Filipino genomes reveal multiple, distinct ancestral components that arrived in the Philippines at completely different time periods, and crucially, these components haven't fully blended together even after thousands of years. This is what geneticists call population structure, and it's extremely unusual for a modern population to maintain such clear genetic stratification. The first and most ancient component in Filipino DNA comes from the Negrito populations, the descendants of the very first humans to arrive in the Philippines approximately 40,000 to 50,000 years ago during the last ice age. These weren't just any early humans. They represent one of the earliest successful out-of-Africa migrations to reach island Southeast Asia. The Negrito groups, including the Aeta, Ati, Mamanwa, and other indigenous communities scattered across the Philippine archipelago, carry genetic signatures that are distinct from all other Asian populations. Their mitochondrial DNA shows haplogroups like M and N that diverged from other Asian lineages extremely early in human history. More significantly, they carry Y chromosome haplogroups like K2B1 that are virtually absent in East Asian populations, but are found in Andamanese populations and some Papua New Guinean groups, suggesting an ancient coastal migration route that bypassed mainland Asia entirely. If you're amazed by our ancestors' story, why Filipino DNA is different from other Asians, help us hit our 500-like goal. Drop a comment about your favorite fact and subscribe to join the Histo-PH family. What makes this component extraordinary is the presence of Denisovan DNA. Denisovans were an extinct species or subspecies of archaic humans that lived across Asia, from Siberia to Southeast Asia. While all non-African humans carry some Neanderthal DNA, about 2%, and some Asian and Oceanian populations carry small amounts of Denisovan DNA, the indigenous Negrito populations of the Philippines carry some of the highest percentages of Denisovan ancestry found anywhere in the world, up to 5%, in some individuals. This is comparable only to Aboriginal Australians and Papuans. The specific Denisovan DNA fragments found in Filipino Negritos are different from those found in other populations, suggesting they interbred with a distinct Denisovan population that lived in what is now the Philippines or nearby regions. This Denisovan ancestry has functional implications. Some of these archaic DNA segments have been positively selected for, meaning they provided survival advantages. Researchers have identified Denisovan gene variants in Filipino populations that affect immune system function, helping with resistance to tropical diseases. Other variants affect metabolism and oxygen processing at high altitudes, though the full functional significance is still being researched. What's clear is that this ancient interbreeding wasn't just a genetic curiosity. It helped early Filipinos survive and thrive in their environment. The second major component of Filipino DNA comes from the Austronesian expansion, which represents one of the most successful human migrations in history. Around 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, people from what is now Taiwan began expanding southward, bringing with them agriculture, pottery, sophisticated boat-building technology, and new languages. These Austronesian-speaking peoples had a genetic profile typical of East Asians, with mitochondrial DNA haplogroups like B4, A1A, and E, and Y chromosome haplogroups like O1AM, 119. When these Austronesian migrants reached the Philippines, something fascinating happened that didn't occur to the same extent in most other Austronesian expansions. Rather than completely replacing the existing Negrito populations through disease, violence, or reproductive competition, which is what happened in many other prehistoric migrations around the world, there was substantial genetic mixing. DNA analysis of modern Filipinos shows that most lowland Filipino populations carry ancestry from both the ancient Negrito populations and the later Austronesian migrants, though in varying proportions depending on the specific ethno-linguistic group. This dual ancestry is what fundamentally distinguishes Filipino DNA from other Asian populations. A typical lowland Filipino might carry anywhere from 20 to 40% Negrito-related ancestry and 60 to 80% Austronesian-related ancestry. Compare this to populations in nearby Taiwan, which show almost pure Austronesian ancestry with minimal admixture from earlier populations, or populations in mainland Southeast Asia, like Thai or Vietnamese, which have their own distinct genetic profiles shaped by different migration histories. The ratio of Negrito to Austronesian ancestry varies significantly across the Philippines, creating a genetic diversity gradient. Some groups in Luzon have higher Austronesian ancestry, while certain Visayan and Mindanao populations show higher proportions of Negrito ancestry. The indigenous Negrito groups themselves, like the Aita of Luzon or the Mamanwa of Mindanao, retain 70 to 90% or more of their ancient pre-Austronesian genetic heritage. This means that within the Philippines, you have some of the most genetically diverse populations in all of Asia, with different groups separated by genetic distances comparable to differences between major continental populations. Recent genetic studies have revealed even more complexity. A 2021 study published in the journal Current Biology analyzed DNA from over 1,000 individuals from 115 different Filipino ethno-linguistic groups. The researchers found at least 5 distinct genetic clusters within the Philippines, each representing different mixtures and migration histories. Some populations in northern Luzon show genetic connections to Taiwan and southern China. Populations in the southern Philippines and the Sulu archipelago show genetic influences from Borneo and other parts of island Southeast Asia. Coastal populations often show different genetic profiles from highland populations in the same region, reflecting different subsistence strategies and social structures. The study also found evidence of multiple waves of Austronesian migration, not just one. The genetic data suggests that after the initial Austronesian expansion around 4,000 years ago, there were subsequent population movements from Borneo, Sulawesi, and other parts of island Southeast Asia into the Philippines over the next few thousand years. Each of these movements left distinct genetic signatures that can still be detected today. This multi-layered migration history is far more complex than what's seen in most other parts of Asia. Another unique aspect of Filipino DNA is the preservation of ancient population structure. In most parts of the world, when different populations come into contact, they gradually blend together over generations until the genetic differences become minimal. This process, called genetic homogenization, has occurred extensively in East Asia, which is why Chinese populations from different regions, despite speaking different dialects and having different cultural practices, are relatively similar genetically. The Philippines is different. Despite thousands of years of contact between Austronesian and Negrito populations, despite trade networks that connected different islands, despite the spread of common languages and cultural practices, Filipino populations have maintained remarkably distinct genetic profiles. Geneticists believe this is due to a combination of factors. The island geography of the Philippines created natural barriers that limited gene flow between populations, cultural practices that emphasized endogamy or marrying within one's own ethno-linguistic group, and perhaps the relatively recent timing of initial Austronesian Negrito contact compared to population mixing events in other parts of Asia. This preservation of genetic diversity has scientific value beyond just understanding Filipino history. The Philippines represents a natural laboratory for studying how human populations interact, mix, and maintain distinctiveness. The genetic patterns seen in Filipinos are helping researchers understand broader questions about human evolution, such as how quickly populations can adapt to new environments. Let's also address the Homo luzonensis discovery, which adds another layer to understanding Filipino genetic uniqueness. In 2019, researchers announced the discovery of a new extinct human species, Homo luzonensis, from Calao Cave in northern Luzon. This species lived at least 50,000 to 67,000 years ago, making it one of the oldest human fossils ever found in island Southeast Asia. The skeletal remains show a bizarre mix of primitive and modern features, curved finger and toe bones, suggesting they still climbed trees, small body size, and teeth that don't match any other known human species. While DNA hasn't yet been successfully extracted from the Homo luzonensis fossils due to poor preservation in the tropical climate, the discovery raises tantalizing questions. Did modern humans arriving in the Philippines encounter and possibly interbreed with Homo luzonensis? The timeline suggests overlap was possible. If interbreeding occurred, could some Filipinos carry genetic material from this mysterious species, in addition to Denisovan and Neanderthal DNA? The Calao Cave discovery isn't alone. In 2007, researchers found the Taban man remains in Palawan, dating back at least 16,500 years. Together, these discoveries demonstrate that the Philippines has been home to various human populations for an extraordinarily long time, and each of these populations may have contributed to the genetic heritage of modern Filipinos in ways we're only beginning to understand. Now let's compare Filipino DNA more specifically to other Asian populations to highlight the differences. Japanese people, for example, have a genetic profile that primarily reflects two ancient populations: the Jomon, who were the original inhabitants of the Japanese islands, and the Yayoi, who migrated from Korea and China, bringing rice agriculture around 3,000 years ago. Modern Japanese carry a mix of these two ancestries, but the proportions are fairly consistent across the population, and both ancestral groups were themselves relatively homogeneous. Chinese populations show tremendous regional diversity, but this diversity is primarily about different proportions of northern and southern Chinese ancestry, both of which derive from population expansions within China over the last 10,000 years. There are ethnic minorities in China like the Hmong or Yao, who have somewhat distinct genetic profiles, but even these groups don't show the same kind of multiple ancient ancestral components seen in Filipinos. Korean DNA is among the most homogeneous in East Asia. Our ancestors' stories don't end here. They're just waiting to be rediscovered. Smash that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to join the Histo PH family for the next epic chapter of our forgotten history.